It always amazes me how we as humans can turn something that was meant to be a force for good into something very destructive. Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Angela and today a roundup video of 10 books, standalone series that all feature religious wars. Religion, something that brings a lot of comfort, hope, consolation to people. But can, like anything in this world, of course, also be turned into something very, very different. And those 10 books explore this in, equally different ways. As always, the selection is very subjective and based on what I've read, what I've heard about. Actually, this is one of the rare roundup videos where I haven't read all the books I'm talking about. But there are some that I definitely wanted to include, so I made a bit of an exception. As always, they're not ranked, but we're looking at them in their order of publication, starting by the earliest and then moving towards the latest. Okay, my first book is one that has been, very much in the news lately because it has been made into 2 new films, and that's of course Dune by Frank Herbert from 1965. Dune is a book that's not so much about a religious war, at least not this very first one, but more about a main character that tries to prevent this war from happening and doesn't want to take on the role that he is cast into, or is very, very reluctantly taking on that role. So it's not your typical, how shall I say, religious war scenario in a novel, but definitely interesting as an early example. Also, like a lot of the novels I will be talking about, Herbert's novel is infused with a lot of, let's say, religious terminology or terminology that has been loaned from religions and is then, maybe slightly reused in the novel. So we find first and foremost, terms and concepts from Islam, but also from Christianity and Buddhism in this novel. And that's my first example, Dune. My second example is Dan Simmons' Hyperion Cantos, with its first installment, Hyperion, from 1989. This is structurally modeled on a medieval text, the Canterbury Tales, where we meet pilgrims that are on their way to the shrine in Canterbury, and they're on a religious pilgrimage. So we already have, like, let's say, a medieval role model for this novel that is clearly situated in the religious realm. So we have characters that are on a pilgrimage to the time tombs where they meet or want to meet the Shrike. The Shrike is easily the most terrifying entity in all of speculative fiction. So the book is well worth reading just for that alone. But we also find that each of the characters in their backstory has some type of connection to the Shrike that is revealed then when we hear the different stories of those different pilgrims. But We also have different religions that play a role in the background. So in some respects, Hyperion is religious war on an intergalactic scale. We have one religion that's very familiar to us in our real world as the Catholic Church, and that's what it's called as well in the book. And then we also have the Church of the Final Atonement, sometimes referred to also as Church of Shrike. And those two, yeah, are kind of like having a war going on that we find in, yeah, the Hyperion Cantos. So it's not just in that first installment, but plays out then in the later volumes more and more. My third example is from 1995. It's Guy Gariel Case, The Lions of Al-Rassan. This is historical fantasy. It's very modeled on Spain with the invasion of the Moors, so Islamic followers, Muslims that are taking over, and that is the backdrop to Case novel. It's very, very close in some respects to the historical events, but also, of course, a fictionalized account. It explores, yeah, three religions that are clearly modeled on the three religions that we can find in the historical conflict. So we have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But we also have, apart from, yeah, this played out as a religious conflict, situations where it's explored how, yeah, a cooperation would actually benefit people much, much more, and what that cooperation could perhaps look like. So the novel kind of tries to explore those two sides of the medal, so to say. Number 4 is from 1998, and this is Octavia E. Butler's The Parable of the Talents. This is the second novel in the Parable series, which was projected to have 3 novels, so it was meant to be a trilogy. The first one is The Parable of the Sower, then we have The Parable of the Talents, and the third was supposed to be The Parable of the Trickster, but unfortunately Butler never wrote this last book. In the first one, Parable of the Sower, we are introduced to the religion that plays then such a big role in the war that's unfolding in the second book. And this religion is called Earth Seeds. The followers of Earth Seeds believe that they can shape and should shape God. They also believe that God is change. And they also have a strong belief that humans should travel beyond Earth to other planets and live on other planets, and that this is the only way that humanity will actually, yeah, reach its full potential. And those ideas are introduced in this first book, Parable of the Sower, whereas Parable of the Talents is much more than centered on a religious conflict between, in America, that's called Christian in America, that is very much ruled by fundamentalist Christians. And then we have the kind of like followers of Earth Seed. And yeah, those two collide, clash. There are other things that are woven into this, like witch hunts, but also questions of, for example, slavery, and how religion is used then to justify slavery. The next example, number 5, is from 2001, and this is Lewis McMaster Bujold's The Curse of the Shellion. This again is historical fantasy. It's set in more or less the same time span and part of the world than Guy Gariel Kay's Lions of Al-Rassan. But unlike Kay, who very much sticks with the historical religions, Bujold invents her own. And it's not so much that we have different religions here, but we have two factions from the same religion who fundamentally disagree on how this is supposed to be interpreted, and then who has the right religion, basically. So this is the conflict that is part of this, in other ways, let's say, medievalized fantasy world and story. Number 6 is a book that I haven't read, or haven't read really. I started and then stopped again. This is R. Scott Baker's The Second Apocalypse series, which starts out with The Darkness That Comes Before from 2003. Now, I have only a limited knowledge about the series. I've read around 100 pages of this very first book, The Darkness That Comes Before. Yes, it has a religious war at its center as well. What Baker maybe does differently is, well, first of all, it's very grim dark. So I think that's a development that we see the further we progress towards our own time, the grimmer and darker the worlds that we encountered are getting. I think that's one of the developments, if we look at this historically, which also makes sense now if we are more and more secularized, if this thing that was meant to give us hope and meaning is ripped away and ripped apart, then what type of world are we left with? And I think that some of this plays a role in R. Scott Baker's novels, as far as I can make out at this stage. The thing that he seems to be keenly interested in is our human cognitive biases that we bring with us, and how they then in turn affect things like, how do we shape meaning as humans, where do we get purpose, and also the effect that might have on our morality. What I've read so far, I have to give it to R. Scott Baker. He writes an extremely beautiful prose. And it's not even very flowery. He manages to be still economic with his words, but nevertheless write his books in a very, very beautiful way. That said, what he transports with this is not always beautiful. Now, this can, of course, create an interesting tension. What I didn't dig so much so far is it's very Nietzsche heavy. Nietzsche is not necessarily my favorite philosopher, so there is that. It's also a very patriarchal world. But as I say, I think I haven't read enough of this to actually come to something like a final verdict. Number 7 is Cameron Hurley's Beldame Apocrypha from 2011. The first book, God's War, already has it in the title. We are in a world that is, very war-ridden. It's also a world where we have a very weird technology that is, insect-based. So anything and everything in this world is powered by insects, and insects and their pheromones are used in a whole range of applications, from medicine to how to cool your drink. And yes, some of this is as disgusting as that might sound. We encounter one of the beldames named Nyx. Nyx is a female warrior figure. In some respects, she is the typical badass female. But in others, she also shows a light on what it might mean to be a female fighter. So, for example, to supplement her meager income that depends on her hunting down deserters from the front of this war, She sometimes comes up with very drastic measures like selling her womb, which fetches a high price in a society where any type of genetic material is highly sought after. The religion involved here is very much modeled on Islam and different factions of Islam that are warring against. And we see, we encounter people who come from those different backgrounds and how they perceive each other. That's one thing that's explored a lot. The other thing is that one faction of the religion sees man as almost disposable and worthless. The only thing they're good for is to fight in this war. So it's also a gender war that is woven into this religious war. The next two examples are again from my TBR pile, so books and series that I haven't read yet, but have heard about and are quite intrigued by. So my next one, number 8, is Brian Lee Durfee's 5 Angel Warriors series from 2016. As I say, I haven't read this yet, but what I've heard so far sounds intriguing. It's again built as grimdark. Again, we don't have different religions, but 3 different branches of one religion that are at war. It has prophecies, and it also seems to have at least 2 very central female characters, and sometimes gets recommended to people who are Malazan fans. And all that together sounds, as I say, good enough to me that it was put on my radar and is on my TBR. So that's all I can say about it. But as I say, sounds interesting. So I will definitely at some stage give it a go. Number 9 is, you've heard it again, something I haven't read. This is P.L. Stewart's A Drowned Kingdom saga from 2021, when the first volume, A Drowned Kingdom, came out. Here we seem to follow 2 princes who come from this, drowned kingdom. So the water level rises, they have to leave their home and are basically exiled. And we get the story as a first-person narrative from one of those 2 princes. And yes, again, religion is very much at the core of the narrative as well and explored. Those, princely brothers come from a religion that, postulates that there is just one God, so monotheistic, and see it as their, task, so to say, to spread this religion and to, get rid of what then is deemed paganism. So it's very much an exploration of this. It seems to be also an exploration about how religion is used for political purposes. It's looking at religious intolerance and also at racism. My last example is a trilogy that weaves a rich tapestry of religions and cultures, and this is the Eden trilogy by Philip Chase from 2023. He released all 3 volumes over the year, so the trilogy is complete. And as I say, we are looking at, let's say, how a religious war can be triggered and what the consequences of this war then will be. So we get basically all 3 stages of a war, and a war that is justified as religiously just, so to say. So we get how is the war started. We look in the 2nd volume very much at how is the war fought, and the 3rd volume explores that, what do we do when the war is over. But it's also an exploration about faith and about, how is faith expressed, what happens if faith is lost, And what happens if faith goes into overdrive and demands or proclaims that the killing of people is justified by it? So a very kind like rich book. The religions in this that are featured in this again are modeled on real life religions. So we find elements from Christianity, but we also find elements from South Asian religions like Hinduism and Buddhism. But Philip Chase also is a medievalist, so we get a lot about yeah, an early medieval mindset that people might have had, and how do they relate to questions that religions try to answer for us. For example, how do we face death? So that's my roundup for 10 books and series that feature religious wars. As always, if you have recommendations for me, put them into the comment section. And thank you for watching. Happy reading and all the best.